start?
All right. My name is Todd Raynar. I am the founder of my studio, Dark Space Studios, and I am the writer artist for Ice Pick. I do all the writing for all my books, all the cover art and the interior art for Ice Pick. Longtime comic fan, and just got into creating my own characters since high school, but shelved it, and about 2016 started to take that dive and make my own comic. So, yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm Brian Dorsey, and I publish through Mountaineer West Productions, which is my publishing company. A couple of things that I have is War Angel series, which is comic book graphic novels. I have Third Testament, which is supernatural horror, also a comic book. In terms of fiction writing, I have the Gateway series. There's actually 5 books in this series, and there's a prequel and a novella that go along with it. So this is science fiction, space opera. Southern Rights is a Southern Gothic supernatural thriller. And then I just published This Republic of Blood, which is an anthology of 4 folk horror novellas. I have a few other books that are out as well, but so kind of an even mixture of comic books, traditional novels, and then also write scripts and screenplays, and have produced a couple short films as well.
So one of the questions I have is, you know, we saw that, was it last fall when one of the major distributors kind of went kaput, you know, and there was some uneasiness with a lot of comic stores. Are they relying more on independent comic books and independent distributors because they can count on them rather than these major conglomerates?
Well, I'll start, but I think we'll probably have, you might have a little more information on this than me, but I'll give you my take on it, right? I think comics for probably the last, I don't want to say 5 years, maybe no longer, have been in this weird state of flux.
Yeah.
In terms of like, what are people looking for? What is the best way to get them to people? And that ranges from, we talked about webtoons a little bit, all the way up through just digital to, do you even make the singles or the floppies anymore, or you just go for collections? Because I think the audience is kind of starting to splinter in terms of what they're looking for more, and that's a struggle for large distributors, I think. Then when you're also, if you're not one of the big, I'll say big 3, because I'll count Image in there with Marvel and DC, they're also struggling, but when you're trying to go up against them, when they really have the power to put stuff in the stores, that drives a lot of people to what we do is Kickstarter. And Kickstarter actually, for a lot of people, has become the distribution method. Yeah. So all my comics are funded through Kickstarter. The majority of my non-convention sales is through Kickstarter. And so that's really, I think, one of the models that a lot of people, and it's not just Kickstarter, there's some other ones.
Crowdfunding ones,
that are out, crowdfunding that are out there. Kickstarter is probably one of the more well-known ones, but there's a lot of independent people that that's become their distribution method. And I think I'll let you speak to a couple of the other ones that are kind of coming up. I think because you were talking, I think you on your podcast, you talked about one of them. And so I don't know if I'm a comic book store. One, I think a lot of local comic book stores have to diversify and not just focus on comics in order to keep the doors open. So they got a lot of comic book / gaming places to kind of do that. So it's kind of a combination of it. And when you really think about, unless you're printing 20,000 copies of a comic, the price, the profit margin for comics are super, super low. First, you got to pay, depending on if you're an artist or not. In my case, I'm not an artist, so I got to pay an artist, then I got to pay to have it printed, which if I'm not printing 20,000 copies or even 5,000 copies, it's going to cost me a couple dollars per issue to print. And then if I sell it for $5 or $6, a comic book store is only going to want to pay half of that, so they can make a profit off of it. So I'm making about 25 to 50 cents per copy, right? And so that's another struggle for like the small independent creators as well. So that's why you'll see a lot of independent comics usually be more in the $6, $7, $8 to $10 range, because that's what it has to be in order to make it feasible for that. And that's kind of my thoughts on it. I'll kind of turn it over to you. So.
I agree with a lot of what you said. I have a little bit kind of different perspective and take. I'm actually working with a comic guy that's put on a few shows in New York area, Phil Russert, and he started Philbo Distribution. And his main goal was, to your point, after Diamond kind of, I guess, just didn't manage their finances well enough, and part of that's because of the industry. Phil decided to start his own distribution, and I've been in talks with him for several months. And for me, it's like, well, as an independent comic producer, how do I get my books into more people's hands, right? How do you get out there and get more eyes on your books? Because we're not going to sell more comics doing more shows necessarily, but if you can get US and Canada and 3,000-4,000 shops to look at your book, then that's going to open it up to more possible sales. I agree the profit margin is extremely low unless you're doing 20, 50, 100,000 books, you know. So it's important to diversify, and that just means more work for us to diversify, to have, like, instead of a main distribution center that, you know, someone that's going to put out 500 of our books or 1,000 of our books because they're shipping to 4,000 comic shops, and that could be a moderate income. We have to have 5 different platforms or 10 different places that we sell our books, whether it be digital, online, and then that opens up to 3 or 4 different places. Physical places could be a couple places on top of our websites that we sell them through. So it is having a diverse kind of portfolio, to look at it that way. And you touched on some of the business side of it, and a lot of that is just planning, making sure that this is how much the book costs to make. Okay, what do I have to charge to not lose money? You know, and I think a lot of us independent creators have that mentality of let's just break even. But this is a business for us, so we also want to try to make a little bit of money on the side, you know, to have that ability to make money. So it is definitely a different landscape than it was 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and it's harder to get our books in front of potential readers, you know, along with the diversification, but also how are we going to get it distributed? Those are probably the 2 biggest challenges.
Yeah, one of the things you started seeing also is because some independent people were able to be very successful at Kickstarter, you started to see some of the larger independent companies start utilizing Kickstarter as well, right? And so they're also looking at it as a distribution path for them.
And that's one thing I've kind of had talks about is these crowdfunding platforms. You know, let's say best case scenario, you know, you take the person that's kind of done the biggest. It comes to mind would be Brian Polito with Lady Death, right? I mean, the guy crushes Kickstarters every time, well into 6 figures. But he's, you know, what's that look like for someone like you and I, how we scale it down? Yeah. We're lucky to get maybe a couple hundred backers. I mean, if we do a couple hundred backers, we're feeling pretty good about it, right? Yeah. But that's only a couple hundred. Even if you hit 300 or 400 backers, when you get into distribution, you're talking potential thousands of people buying your book, right? So there's a big difference between 100 or 1,000. Yeah. You know, so that's why, like, crowdfunding is good. I think that opens it to a new audience, because there's people that only go to crowdfunding sources. They don't go to comic shops, you know. And then you need that online presence. You need the in-person presence that we have here to reach fans.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the Kickstarters, it can vary wildly what you need to break even. Yeah. And we talked about this, like the number of covers that you offer, what artists you choose. And it's rough sometimes because there's some artists that do incredible, fantastic work that just don't have, like, the following of others. And so you also have to look at it like, if I'm going to pay, and typically what I'll say the range for covers that I pay for range from $250 up to about $1,000 per cover, right? And so with, like, my War Angels, I need to make, because of the artists that I choose and the covers, and it costs me about $150 per page of interior art, including coloring, lettering, all that stuff, and printing, because you got to print them, and shipping, right? I need to make about $8,000 on a Kickstarter to break even. Yeah. Right? Now, if I reduce the number of artists that I paid $1,000 a page for, or a cover for, I can reduce that down to like 5,000, but I may not get as many backers because I don't have that artist with that specific name. So it's all like, what's the balance? And I think a lot of people, like if you are sitting there saying, I'm going to be an indie comic creator to become rich, odds are that's not going to happen.
Unless you have a name.
Yeah, unless you're already
Established.
well-known or get like some huge cover artist to, you know, and those people are $3,000-$5,000 per cover, right? And so in reality, and I think with most indie stuff, it's like there's a story I want to tell. I want to get it out to people. I want to be able to continue to do it. So, you know, what is my path to be able to do that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree. Like for me, it's a little different. I think because I'm a writer and artist, kind of self-taught writer, self-taught artist. I do have a degree in design and stuff, but like that doesn't really apply to comic art. You know, comic art is its own thing. So for my cost, I guess cost of entry, I guess is considerably lower. But after I did all the ice pick stuff, I was like, hey, you know, I need to get an art team. I need something to get out to the fans a little bit sooner because you'll lose fans if you don't produce. And that's the one thing that like as indie creators, you always got to have that next book ready to go. And so it's almost like this constant wheel of trying to make a profit to get the next book funded, to then make a profit to get the next book funded. And so for me, like that cost is, it can get up there. And it can be a little bit of a struggle, but a lot of us, you know, just being at shows, we talk to other creators, a lot of us have that passion to keep doing it kind of regardless. We find a way to make it work. We find a way to get our books, you know, made and produced and printed and into the hands. And a lot of us are just passionate about that storytelling, about that artwork.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot of creators that decide I'm going to take this artistic, literary path for my life to become rich. Sometimes it happens along the way, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing, like how many school teachers decide they're going to become a school teacher to make a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
It's something they feel like they enjoy doing and they want to do.
Yeah.
And then if the stars align, we've talked about people that we know that, you know, we're just like a booth partner. There we go. They said we're done hearing that part.
Booth partner.
They were just, you know, they were at a table across from you at a convention, you know, kind of doing the grind. You know, the right person saw their stuff, the right agent saw it, and now they're making a lot of money.
And the flip side of that, we've seen people disappear.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, people who do it for 2 or 3, 4 years, and then they don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question that, I mean, I ask it of sports and I ask it of other things, so don't think it's just geared towards against you guys. But how do you outgrow an insular audience? Because that's one of the issues that you have, is that you have an insular audience that may or may not accept new people coming in, and I'm talking about even fans, to where if I just want a comic book, how do I get a comic book without being treated like I'm, you know, I'm a sodomite, you know, I'm the worst person on earth.
Yeah, I think I've got 2 different types of answers, one for comics and then one for like novels, right? And if I had the exact answer, I would be making a lot more money. But my take on it, right, is recently, you know, and you look, you know, if you just look at Marvel and DC and the movies and all that stuff, there's a little more of an acceptance for comics as an avenue, right? As opposed to people who their entire lives are like, yeah, there's actually good stories in here, right? It's not just a kid's medium, right? And so that's opened it up to broader people, but oddly enough, there's a little bit of, you still need to call it a graphic novel before they'll look at it instead of a comic book, right? Because a graphic novel is more mature, right? Yeah. Even though it's the exact same stuff on the inside, right? And we talked about it yesterday in a panel that like comics, graphic novels can be the absolute right way to tell a story, sometimes in ways that would not do justice if it was in film or if it was in a book, right?
Yeah.
And so that's out there. So you got to figure out how that audience is going to respond, you know, and a lot of it has to do with like what social media sites are you looking at? what conventions are you deciding to go to or not go to? And you got to watch conventions because they change over time as well. They'll morph from one type of a convention into another and have different types of crowds and audiences and things like that. I know sometimes, particularly, in today's world, one visual can sometimes make the difference, right? I will tell you, issue 6 of War Angels had this Jason Metcalf cover on it. And this single image is more responsible for the growth that I had in Kickstarters and social media over the last couple of years than any other single thing that I've done. And it's one image, right? And so again, it kind of goes back to, do you have the right thing at the right time? Do you strike gold? Or do you just kind of slowly build that kind of following? And then at some point you hit critical mass and it goes over. And I think, and we've talked about this as well, I think there's different ranges. Like when you look at Kickstarters, I think the first thing you want to do is kind of break that $2,000 to $3,000 per Kickstarter range, right? I got to get over that hump. What is the thing to get those extra backers in, right? And then, the one that I'm in is, how do you break like the $12,000 range, right? Because when you look at a lot of these Kickstarters, I make a couple $1,000 group of creators. I make about $10,000. And then from there, it jumps to like 30 to 50. And then there's like the 10 or so that make over 100,000, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you build that kind of momentum to do that, right? And that's for the comic side. And then for the book side, it really gets into like subgenres and what kind of niches you're trying to write to for that. Because like I write horror, but I don't write like mainstream monster horror, right? I write like gothic horror, folk horror, which is a much smaller audience for that, right? And it's, as an example, you can look at like Amazon's algorithm for sales, and there's times I'll be like, oh, I'm in the top 25 for folk horror, but that might mean that somebody bought 3 of my books that day, right? And so you also decide, what stories do I want to tell? Do I feel that I need to write? And do I need to, am I chasing sales or notoriety, which is absolutely fine. There's a whole bunch of people who have quit their day jobs because they follow, I forget the guy's name, but it's like 50 books to $50,000, 20 books to $50,000. And he's like, right toward the genre. If you want to be a writer full time, do these things. Go study the genre you want to write books that are very similar in style to that genre, and then write 20 books, market them this way, and you can probably make $50,000 a year. And there's a bunch of people who have done that, right? Does it impact, from my opinion, their creative kind of flow? If they're always, I have to write this way to do this thing? Probably, but I'm sure they're probably pretty happy with what they're doing too, right? So it's not my decision to decide on what their creative decisions are. I find it tough because I have a vision of what I want to write and what I feel comfortable writing. Not that you shouldn't get uncomfortable sometimes as a writer, but I've had an opportunity, we talked about this, a Netflix producer is like, hey, if you can write something in the genre that I produce, we can talk about it, but like I can't write their stuff. Like it's just, I don't know if I got it in me or not, right? It wouldn't be me if I wrote what they wanted, right? So that's kind of me for the comics and the book side. But.
I would say for me to expand, I guess, the viewership, or to make people feel that they're not outside that clique or whatever you want to call it, right? For me, it's about just being genuine. I think genuine in who I am and what I write. I always tell people that I'm a selfish writer, artist, or I write stuff that I would want to read. And I just have been lucky enough that, fortunate that people like what I write, what I draw. So, and even for my wife, I wouldn't be here. She's super supportive, and she's like, you need to expand on what you do, right? So when I started with Ice Pick, it was very much 90s kind of comics. So that's the niche. That's the group of people that are probably going to like that book. But then you got to look at other genres. And to your point, Brian, you write a few different genres, right? It's all kind of within that larger umbrella, but you have these all little subgenres. So that's what I ended up doing, was just taking in consideration that, not everyone's going to want superhero 90s stuff.
Yep.
So I got to go a little bit different. And, and then I was like, okay, well, I like horror. Again, being a little bit selfish, I like horror. I like supernatural stuff. So I wrote a supernatural horror book. And I think having a variety is absolutely that door, that gateway to engage with new fans or fans that may be outside. Maybe they've never read comics, but they like that genre, so they come up and you're like, hey, I have this type of book. And they're like, oh, they had no idea that a comic could be this. It's not like a funny comic strip. It's not like Archie or something. You know what I mean? It can be a little bit on the mature, I guess, if you call it that side of storytelling. And I think to that point, like indie comics, we've talked about that some of the indie comics have the most unique storytelling, the most kind of unique art, and it's not bound by any other thing but us, right? The sky's the limit for how we want to tell a story, how these characters want to develop. So yeah, I think just being genuine, being ourselves, and being honest with what we produce, I think that's engaging for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think kind of a flip side to growing outside your niche or your genre. There's also something to be said for going all in.
That's fair,
right? Because Ice Pick's 90s kind of action revenge kind of thing, but if you were to tap into everyone who's interested into that, right? That's a pretty beefy audience.
That's
as
a huge
well,
audience,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And so that's another path you can take, is just hey, I'm going to be that person.
Yeah. That's what I do. 100%.
Yeah.
Well, so one of my questions would be on IP. How do you protect it? And it's great to say trademarks and copyright, but as well as I do, that's as flimsy as anything anymore.
Yeah.
But how do you protect it against kind of an encroaching world to where?
Well, I'll start by saying, I forget which writer or whatever said this. There's only 3 or 5 stories that have ever actually existed. There's just different variations of it, right? So there's an element of that. There's no way whatever you create is going to be this 100% standalone thing that doesn't remind someone of something else or isn't kind of a thing, because we're all influenced by our own, things we read and see in our life or whatever. And so everything you create is going to be kind of a combination of what you've seen and heard and read and everything. And there's no way you're not going to get tidbits of stuff from it. There was one time I was working, when I was writing Gateway, I was like, don't make it Firefly, don't make it Firefly, don't make it Firefly. I just kept telling myself that whole time, because I was way deep into Firefly at that time. And I was like, I can't, and so I just say that to say that, there's going to be similarities across the board, and you got to live with that if something else someone does is in the ballpark of what you do. But if they're straight up taking your stuff, or you're like, that is a little too much. I think the only avenue you've got, because regardless of what you do, right now, I could probably go, and I've done it, Google War Angels, and I could find 3 or 4 places where it's free that I have nothing to do with, right? Someone got a PDF of it, and it's out there, right? You can do watermark stuff and things like that, but the people who are purchasing your PDF want a clean PDF, right? You probably understand some of the digital controls that can go in place better than me, but I know with the stuff I'll do on Amazon, including the comic books, you can set that up to where it's a little harder for them to get access to do anything with it other than view it on their,
device,
their reader or whatever. So do that. Absolutely do. You have your copyright statement in the book and in the comic book. And in reality, in a lot of cases, as long as you prove that I wrote this story first, right? And before everything that occurred after that, here's evidence that it was mine. It's a decent legal standing. I do take a little bit more specific, I don't want to say precautions is the right word, but for my scripts and screenplays. So I registered them with the Writers Guild of America. And so it's a formal registration, and I got a registration number on the date that says, here's this script that was created on this time, right? And then when you really get close, and this is something I was going to talk about in the producer panel later, is Hunger, we're kind of coming up pretty quick to hopefully trying to get a feature version of that made. And so I actually went the full step to get the U.S. copyright of that, which is like the ironclad, here it is. So it kind of ranges and varies on what you want to do with your stuff, what you think might happen with your stuff. But I would definitely say get something that can prove it's yours, because you never know what's going to happen or what's going to become big. You could have something in your mind that was a throwaway that you wrote some short story about or did like a single issue one-shot comic with. The next thing you know, it's big. Or someone did something exactly like that. And then you got some grounds to at least go have a conversation with them.
Yeah, it's a little challenging, and maybe with the digital age and this whole AI movement, it's become even more challenging. I would kind of second a lot of what you said there, is make sure you have some sort of like, hey, I did this, whether it be, I mean, writing's a little bit different, but for artwork, and like I said, with the digital age, like a lot of that can be changed or kind of forged away, I guess. But for me, it's kind of, I did it, here it is, I put a copyright in there. You know, I always tell people, if they're interested, I'll gladly sell my IPs for the right price. And you can have that headache of dealing with copyright stuff. But it's just putting it out there and making sure that your name is attached to it. I will say that, you know, looking as a kind of artist for all these years, like looking into like at least the United States copyright laws, like they've built in a lot of protections. So that's nice in this country. Other countries are a little bit lenient on copyright.
Oh yeah, a lot of the stuff that I find is not in the U.S.
Yeah, I think even countries. I read in Japan, it's kind of like, hey, there's no copyrights. If someone does it better, then they did it better than you, and you just have to accept that, you know? Yeah. But I think producing stuff in the U.S. has some nice somewhat of a legal standpoint to help with that.
A good example of that kind of, you know, is it the same or is it not the same? About 2017, 2018, I wrote a book, which is an adaptation of a script that I wrote for a short film that we did called Lioness. Now, I'm sure people, you know, there's a TV show out there now called Lioness. My book was about a female special operations character, right? But it was sci-fi. It was a bunch of different stuff involved with it. And in reality, we both took the name from the Marine Corps Lioness program that existed in the early, 2000s, right? And so the name itself is tied to the same beginning, but mine's sci-fi, enhanced warrior kind of thing, where this is more modern special operations stuff. But it's interesting because people will come by the booth and say, "Oh, did you write that because of the TV show or whatever?" I was like, "No, I wrote this like 5 years before the TV show," kind of a thing. But that's a case where when it first came out, I was like, I got to go see what this thing's about.
Right.
Because if it was this other stuff,
I'd be all over
then
it.
there would be a conversation to be had, right? But it was clearly not. I'm pretty sure Taylor Sheridan isn't flipping through, my Lioness book coming up with an idea for what he's going to write about. But if he did, I would have been able to prove that I wrote it.
Right.
Not only that, but I wrote that, and I wrote a script, and I wrote a short film for it in between 2015 and 2017.
Yeah.
Right. I would have had the receipts, as they say.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and then a lot of the thankfully the laws that we have in place kind of protect the creator side of stuff. So like you mentioned, it's similar, and the foundation, kind of the beginning, is the same. But once there's so many changes down the road, even though it's even the same name, and honestly, when I saw that, I thought of you. I was like, wait, is he now? Because I know you were doing short films and stuff. I was like, wait, is Brian doing this? But yeah, thankfully, like there's enough differences that, and we as creators have to pay attention to that kind of stuff a lot. Yeah. If you see like a character that's kind of like, whoa, that raises an eyebrow, we have to research it to say, when did we start whatever we created versus when that was created?
Yeah, and I think that's harder to prove in a comic book world than it is in the like literary world, so to speak, like the novels, because there's so many. If you look at Marvel and DC, they've got the same version of the same character a bunch of times. right? Just
Yeah.
slight variations, but
Similar.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts?
Do it. If you're a creator, I mean, if you're a writer, I get that question a lot. Like, how did you do this, or what was your motive? I'm like, I just kept plugging away a little bit each day, and here's the final product, right? So, don't give up.
Yeah, I had the idea for this gateway story in my head for about 15 years before I wrote it. This was my first fiction thing, right? And so I go back, I was like, should I have just written it then, right? It would have been a completely different story,
Yep.
right? But if that would have given me another 20 years of thinking about how to write fiction, right? If that makes sense. So, and I'm not one of those to be like, oh, if I would have done that, this happened, because I think I was in a better place, older, more life experience, all that stuff to make it a good story, a better story, right? But the craft of writing is also something you learn as well. And so I had done some nonfiction, like history books in between that time frame. And that's what really gave me the oomph to like kind of go write the fiction piece. But yeah, I would say just go do it. And if you're ever in a conversation with someone, you say, well, yeah, I wrote a book. I'm about my third year of edits. Stop editing. Just, if it's, you want it to look good, you want it to be right, but, perfection is the enemy of good enough sometimes, right? And so you got to find the right balance.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For Ice Pick, I was in my teenage years when I was in high school, and I shelved it for well over 20 years, right? And it got to a point where I was like, I started going through my old art. I'm like, there's something here. I just need to refine it. And it doesn't need, like you said, it doesn't need to be perfect. I need to be comfortable with the story I'm telling or the artwork that I'm presenting. It's never going to be perfect.
But when I look at it, and I look at the same thing, ideally for like film and stuff. And there's a realistic element to this, right? If, for some reason, 10 years from now, I've won 5 Academy Awards or something, right? And then it's like, well, that was a perfect movie. I don't know how many perfect movies there are.
Few.
There's a lot of movies that have moments of perfection.
Yeah.
So I look at it like life. Is your life perfect? No, right? Is it interesting, or do you do things that are interesting? So when you look at a story or a film or a comic, right, is it interesting? Does it get people's attention? Do they start to care about the characters? There might be some imperfections in it, not just purposely in the character, but there could be, there's a typo, or like, well, that could have probably went a different way. But you also look for those moments where you're like, that is a great line, or that panel
Was perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree.
And so that's kind of what I look for is a base level of competence in storytelling and in the artwork, and moments of like, that is really good. That I'm going to remember that comic, or I'm going to remember that book because of this scene or this line, or sometimes even that panel, right? There's a couple one-shots with the War Angels, particularly with like the Kifa character's origin story. There's 2 panels in that, which I think are the 2 best panels that I've seen in any of my comics. And I just like, that was perfect.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I shoot for.
Yeah.